Oh, whistle, and I'll come to you, my lad.
I suppose you'll be getting away pretty soon now full term is over, Professor, said a person not in the story to the Professor of Ontonography, soon after they had sat down next to each other at a feast in the hospitable hall of St. James's College. The Professor was young, neat, and precise in speech. Yes, he said. My friends have been making me take up golf this term, and I mean to go to the East Coast, in point of fact to Burnstow, I dare say you know it, for a week or 10 days to improve my game. I hope to get off tomorrow. Oh, Parkins, said his neighbour on the other side. If you're going to Burnstow, I wish you'd have a look at the site of the Templars' preceptory, and let me know if you think it'd be any good to have a dig there in the summer. On the following day, Parkins did, as he hoped, succeed in getting away from his college, and in arriving at Burnstow. He was made welcome at the Globe Inn, was safely installed in a large double-bedded room, and was able, before retiring to rest, to arrange his materials for work in apple pie order upon a commodious table which occupied the outer end of the room, and was surrounded on 3 sides by windows looking out seaward. The central window looked out straight to sea, and those on the left and right commanded prospects along the shore to the north and south respectively. On the south you saw the village of Burnstow. On the north no houses were to be seen, but only the beach and the low cliff backing it. Immediately in front was a strip of rough grass, dotted with old anchors, capstans, and so forth. Then a broad path, then the beach. Whatever may have been the original distance between the Globe Inn and the sea, not more than 60 yards now separated them. The rest of the population of the inn was, of course, a golfing one. The most conspicuous figure was, perhaps, that of a retired soldier, who possessed a voice of incredible strength, and of views of a pronouncedly Protestant type. Professor Parkins spent the great part of the day in what he called improving his game in company with this Colonel Wilson, and during the afternoon the Colonel's demeanour assumed a colouring so lurid that even Parkins jibed at the thought of walking home with him from the links. He determined that it would be wiser to allow the influences of tea and tobacco to do what they could with the Colonel before the dinner hour should render a meeting inevitable. I might walk home tonight along the beach, he reflected. Yes, and take a look at the ruins of which my colleague was talking. I don't exactly know where they are, by the way, but I expect I can hardly help stumbling on them. This he rather literally did, for in picking his way from the links to the shingle beach, his foot caught, partly in a gorse root and partly in a biggish stone, and over he went. When he got up and surveyed his surroundings, he found himself in a patch of somewhat broken ground covered with small depressions and mounds. He must, he quite rightly concluded, be on the site of the preceptory he had promised to look at. He remembered vaguely that the Templars, to whom this site had belonged, were in the habit of building round churches, and he thought a particular series of the humps or mounds near him did appear to be arranged in something of a circular formation. He then proceeded to examine an oblong eminence which lay east of the centre of the circle, and seemed, to his thinking, likely to be the base of a platform or altar. At the northern end, a patch of the turf was gone, removed by some boy or other creature. It might, he thought, be as well to probe the soil here for evidences of masonry, and he took out his knife and began scraping away the earth. A portion of soil fell inward as he scraped, and disclosed a small cavity. By tapping and scratching the sides with his knife, he was able to make out that it must be an artificial hole in the masonry. Of course, it was empty. No. As he withdrew the knife, he heard a metallic clink, and when he introduced his hand, it met with a cylindrical object lying on the floor of the hole. Naturally enough, he picked it up, and when he brought it into the light, he could see that it too was of a man's making, a metal tube about 4 inches long, and evidently of some considerable age. By the time Parkins had made sure there was nothing else in this odd receptacle, it was too late and too dark for him to think of undertaking any further search. The object which he now had safe in his pocket was bound to be of some slight value at least, he felt sure. The wind was bitter from the north, but was at his back when he set out for the Globe. He quickly rattled and clashed through the shingle, and gained the sand, upon which the going was both good and quiet. One last look behind showed him a prospect of company on his walk, in the shape of a rather indistinct personage, who seemed to be making great efforts to catch up with him, but made little, if any, progress. There was an appearance of running about his movements, but the distance between him and Parkins did not seem to lessen. So at least, Parkins thought, and decided that he almost certainly did not know him, and that it would be absurd to wait until he caught up. For all that, company, he began to think, would really be very welcome on that lonely shore, if only you could choose your companion. Upon his return, Parkins had, in fact, very little time for dressing. When he met the colonel at dinner, peace, or as much of her as the gentleman could manage, reigned once more in the military bosom. Nor was she put to flight in the hours of bridge that followed dinner. When, therefore, he retired towards 12 o'clock, he felt that he had spent his evening in quite a satisfactory way, and that, even for so long as a fortnight or 3 weeks, life at the Globe would be supportable under similar conditions. Especially, he thought, if I go on improving my game. As he went along the passages, he met the boots of the Globe, who stopped and said, "Beg your pardon, sir, but I was brushing your coat just now. There's something that fell out of the pocket. I put it in your chest of drawers, sir. A piece of pipe or something like that, sir." "Thank you, sir. You'll find it in your chest of drawers, sir." "Yes, sir. Good night, sir." The speech served to remind Parkins of his little discovery of that afternoon. It was with some considerable curiosity that he turned it over by the candlelight. It was of bronze, he now saw, and was shaped very much after the manner of the modern dog whistle. In fact, it was. Yes, certainly it was, actually no more, no less than a whistle. He put it to his lips, but was quite full of a fine, caked-up sand or earth, which would not yield to knocking, but must be loosened with a knife. Parkins cleared out the earth onto a piece of paper, and took the latter to the window to empty it out. Then he shut the window and took his whistle to the light again. Why, surely, there were marks on it, and not merely marks, but letters. There were legends on both the front and the back of the whistle. The one read, "Fla fer bis flay." The other, "Qui es ist qui venit." I ought to be able to make it out, he thought, but I suppose I am a little rusty in my Latin. The long one does seem simple enough. It ought to mean, "Who is this who is coming?" Well, the best way to find out is evidently to whistle for him. He blew tentatively, and stopped suddenly, startled and yet pleased at the note he had elicited. It had a quality of infinite distance in it, and soft as it was, he somehow felt it must be audible for miles around. It was a sound, too, that seemed to have the power of forming pictures in the brain. He saw quite clearly for a moment a vision of a wide, dark expanse at night, with a fresh wind blowing, and in the midst a lonely figure, how employed he could not tell. Perhaps he would have seen more had not the picture been broken by the sudden surge of a gust of wind against his casement, so sudden that it made him look up, just in time to see the white glint of a seabird's wings somewhere outside the dark panes. The sound of the whistle had so fascinated him that he could not help try it once more, this time more boldly. The note was little, if at all, louder than before, and repetition broke the illusion. No picture followed, as he half hoped it might. But what is this? Goodness, what force the wind can get up in a few minutes. What a tremendous gust. There, I knew the window fastening was no use. Ah, I thought so. Both candles out. It's enough to tear the room to pieces. The first thing was to get the window shut. Parkins struggled with the small casement, and felt almost as if he were pushing back a sturdy burglar, so strong was the pressure. It slackened all at once, and the window banged to and latched itself shut. Now to relight the candles and see what damage, if any, had been done. No, nothing seemed amiss, no glass even was broken in the casement. But the noise had evidently roused at least one member of the household. The colonel was to be heard slumping in his stockinged feet on the floor above, and growling. Quickly as it had risen, the wind did not fall at once. On it went, moaning and rushing past the house, at times rising to a cry so desolate that, as Parkins disinterestedly said, it might have made fanciful people quite uncomfortable. Even the unimaginative, he thought, after a quarter of an hour, might be happier without it. Whether it was the wind, or the excitement of golf, or the researches in the preceptory that kept Parkins awake, he was not sure. Awake he remained in any case, long enough to fancy that he was the victim of all manner of fatal disorders. He would lie counting the beats of his heart, convinced that it was going to stop work any moment, and would entertain grave suspicions of his lungs, brain, liver, etc. Suspicions which he was sure would be dispelled by the return of daylight, but which until then refused to be put aside. He found a little vicarious comfort in the idea that someone else was in the same boat. A near neighbour was tossing and rustling in his bed too. The next stage was that Parkins shut his eyes and determined to give sleep every chance. Here again, over-excitement asserted itself in another form, that of making pictures. Experta crede, pictures do come to the closed eyes of one trying to sleep, and are often so little to his taste that he must open his eyes and disperse them. Parkins' experience on this occasion was a very distressing one. He found that the picture which presented itself to him was continuous. When he opened his eyes, of course, it went, but when he shut them once more it framed itself afresh, and acted itself out once again. What he saw was this: a long stretch of shore, shingle-edged by sand, and intersected at short intervals with black groins running down to the water. A scene, in fact, so like that of his afternoon's walk that, in the absence of any landmark, it could not be distinguished therefrom. The light was obscure, conveying an impression of gathering storm, late winter evening, and slight cold rain. On this bleak stage, at first no actor was visible. Then, in the distance, a bobbing black object appeared. A moment more, and it was a man, running, jumping, clambering over the groins, and every few seconds looking eagerly back. The nearer he came, the more obvious it was that he was not only anxious, but even terribly frightened, though his face was not to be distinguished. He was, moreover, almost at the end of his strength. On he came, each successive obstacle seemed to cause him more difficulty than the last. Half climbing, half throwing himself, he did get over the next groin, and fell all in a heap on the other side. There, as if really unable to get up again, he remained crouching under the groin, looking up in an attitude of painful anxiety. So far, no cause whatsoever for the fear of the runner had been shown. But now, there began to be seen, far up the shore, a little flicker of something light-coloured moving to and fro with great swiftness and irregularity. Rapidly growing larger, it too declared itself as a figure in pale, fluttering draperies, ill-defined. There was something about its motion which made Parkins very unwilling to see it at close quarters. It would stop, raise arms, bow itself toward the sand, then run stooping across the beach to the water edge and back again, and then, rising upright once more, continue its course forward at a speed that was startling and terrifying. The moment came when the pursuer was hovering about from left to right only a few yards beyond the groin, where the runner lay in hiding. After 2 or 3 ineffectual castings hither and thither, it came to a stop, stood upright, with arms raised high, and then darted straight forward towards the groin. It was at this point that Parkins always failed in his resolution to keep his eyes shut. With many misgivings as to incipient failure of eyesight, overworked brain, excessive smoking, and so on, he finally resigned himself to light his candle, get out a book, and pass the night waking, rather than be tormented by this persistent panorama, which he saw clearly enough could only be a morbid reflection of his walk and his thoughts on that very day. The scraping of match on box and the glare of light must have startled some creatures of the night, rats or what not, which he heard scurry across the floor from the side of his bed with much rustling. A candle and book were duly produced, over which Parkins pored till sleep of a wholesome kind came upon him, and that in no longer space. For about the first time in his orderly and prudent life, he forgot to blow out the candle, and when he was called next morning at 8 o'clock, there was still a flicker in the socket and a sad mess of guttered grease on the top of the little table.